A very good morning to all the participants of this webinar. Friends, DTRTI Lucknow, we are once again present before you with another offering from DTRTI Lucknow. And today we're discussing and talking about case laws, both in favor of case department. We are taking some time both from you from your budget watching. I'm sure that, you are probably watching the budget, and we are also sure that you will going through the budget documents as well as the budget later on, regarding the indiabudget.in. Friends, a big welcome to you at DTRTI. DTRTI is committed to standards of excellence in terms of all kinds of delivery, whether it is targeted to increase your knowledge,
किसी को अंदर मत आने दीजिएगा, बोलिएगा सर क्लास में
improve your or and this webinar is going to deal with these laws. But before we go to the case laws part of it, it is our pleasure to invite Suren Monster, the Joint Director of DTRTI, inaugurated the webinar. Our ADG, Vivek Kumar, who is from the 1992 batch of the IRS, is away for some time due to very difficult circumstances where he has to travel somewhere else. And gives us pleasure to have Suren Monster from 2010 batch of IRS and the Joint Director of Training at DTRTI Lucknow in this webinar. Hence, DTRTI is now headed by Vivek Kumar sir and batch, and after the post of the Joint Director being held by Shri Suren Monster, we have another Joint Director, Shri Nagendra Dixit, and apart from him, we have Rajesh Tiwari, the Assistant Director of Training. We also have additional assistant directors in the form of Srimati Sina Chaudhary, Ajay Tripathi, Sri Abhinav Chaudhary, and Srimati Poonam Verma. We have 4 additional assistant directors. And apart from them, we have a team of income tax inspectors. In this course, Sri Manoj Kumar Vishwakumar duties as the course coordinator. Srimati Saima Khan doing duties as the senior TA. The beautiful the flyer that you saw at the beginning of the program was sent by Srimati Saima Khan, senior TA. And of course, we have our DTRTI, we have other staff, including the AO staff. And of course, our Mukesh, Rajneesh, Mr. Sharma, and other service staff also, the people as well as the catering people.
Good morning to all of you. Sir, hope I am audible and clear. Arvind Mishra sir, am I audible? Hello. Can anybody confirm that I am audible?
You are audible, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. First of all, let me take this opportunity to welcome you all in this course, latest case lodge. And on behalf of DTRTI Lucknow and whole team of our institute, I welcome you all for this fresh course. It's a cold morning, and budget is also going on. I know the hardship you people are facing, but you should also be aware about the latest case law. That is the motto behind this course. So legal jurisprudence of any sort, legal jurisprudence of any sort in general, and income tax act in particular are very dynamic in nature. The law is very dynamic. So until unless you are aware about the latest interpretation of different words and connotations used in the law, you would not be able to do justice with the intent of the law. That is very important. So you must understand the dynamic nature of law that flows from the legislature and goes up to the higher judiciary, where they interpret it in different terms, in different contexts, and take it as per the what our values of our constitution. As everybody knows that our constitution is the highest law of the land, and all other law must have conformity with highest law of the land. So the basic motto behind is to uphold the constitutional values. So that is the purpose. So when all the laws should be confirmed by the constitution, so that is why the legal interpretation of law is very important. So as constitution is a living and organic document, every time it changes. If you see the constitution article 21 gone under tremendous change since last 70 years. So in the same manner, the income tax act in particular also gone through tremendous changes. So the earlier we were the enforcement agencies, so now we are facilitators. So we have to bother with the rule of law of the land. So it's a rule of law, not a law, not rule. It's a rule of law, not rule by law. So what we as an income tax authority do, that we are bound by the circular instructions, and some sort of we are somehow biased towards the revenue. It is generally told to us that whenever there is a conflict between revenue and the interpretation of law in favor of SSE, we must follow the revenue. But the point is that the purpose of law is to ensure certain objectives, and ultimately these objectives are just the constitutional values. So interpretation of law, whenever we are doing interpretation of law, we must ensure that law must not, it should be rule of law not rule by the law. So law should not be used for the harassment of some sort of the citizens of India or any kind of citizen. So So our sole guiding force for interpretation of any provision where we find ambiguity should be only the Constitution of India. And wherever we have given some other kind of powers to our enforcement authorities. So for example, like Section 132, which is the definitely violation of the constitutional fundamental right, but that provision was upheld by the court of law because it comes within the reasonable restrictions put on the fundamental right. So whenever we are going out of the box, the enforced provisions are already given to us. So when we are interpreting any general provision of the act and we go by the against the SSE and for the sake of revenue or for the sake of because so tomorrow some audit objection will come, tomorrow some vigilance proceeding may be initiated against you. So we definitely save our careers and our perception about the law, but not we don't do justice with the law of the land and citizens of the India. So our sole guiding force should be the constitutional values which are provided to us. And if you go through the various Supreme Court judgment on the different provisions of the income tax, you will find that the many judgments of Supreme Court are clearly putting the light on our efforts to collect the revenue. We are not just to collect. We are not here just to collect the revenue, but we are also here to prevent the misuse of the law, and we are here to ensure that no citizen of the country should get harassed because of our interpretation of the law. So whenever I see the different orders of the different courts, I find that our interpretation are generally put in the dustbin, and Supreme Court interpret in some different ways. And one wonderful law, I remember that penny sugar case, where the Supreme Court explained the section 81 IB, I hope so, in such a manner that all our interpretation are gone in the dustbin. So we must ensure that, and we not only ensure that the provisions of the income tax are correctly interpreted, but we also ensure that whatever interpretation has been put forward by the Supreme Courts and High Court, we must use that kind of interpretation, the intent behind that interpretation in our interpretation of different provisions which has not seen the light of the higher courts. So in this context, this course has been designed, and Sri Arvind Misra sir has put a lot of effort in arranging the faculty and designing this course. We want to keep you up to date, so we included only last 3 years case laws, which are very important when we think about Income Tax Act. We arranged a wonderful faculty for you, and one of the most prominent faculties, Sri S.S. Rana sir. He is well known in the arena of the case laws and interpretation of law. He written a lot of books. He is such a renowned person for case law when it comes in our mind, that you will definitely get a lot of benefit from his words of wisdom. We also have Arvind Misra sir. He is also the person who always keep a watch on the different case laws and different judgment of the Supreme Court and High Court. He will also enlighten you on different provisions of the Act. It's my humble request to all of you, please stay connected with us, though today is a budget day. So still you stay connected with us. In case of any technical problem, you please contact us on the number provided to you. And please stay connected. You will definitely, I'm sure that you will get a lot of benefit once the course will reach on its validation. Please pay attention and stay connected. Thank you very much, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir, for having addressed the participants, and a fresh DTRTI Lucknow team, including the ADG sir and the Joint Director sir, and other officers also, like Rajesh Tiwari ji. They have recently joined us, and we feel very enthused and very fresh in delivering our courses to all of you. So friends, we move on to the first session of today. But before we start the first session, it is my proud privilege to welcome SS Rana sir among us. Sir has already joined us and he will be delivering the first session of today. Sir will not only be dealing with the case laws, sir will also be telling you about the common mistakes that normally happen during the assessment proceedings. And as assessment proceedings are becoming quite different in the last 1 year or so, with a lot of things getting added and modified, either in form of the law itself or in form of the standard operating procedures to be adopted to implement those provisions. It would be great to hear SS Rana sir, because SS Rana sir has worked already with ITAT for a considerable period of time. He has a huge experience. Sir is an IRS officer of 1994 batch. Whenever a question arises as to the interpretation of the case laws that are coming in from the Supreme Court, from the High Court and the tribunals, SS Rana sir's views are always considered and kept in mind, and it's always a pleasure to watch and listen to him, and to keep in mind the opinion that Rana sir has expressed on various matters. So it gives us a great deal of happiness and pleasure to welcome sir among us. Sir, a big welcome to the DTRTI webinar. And friends, sir is a very sought after speaker, even at the NADT and among all the DTRTIs. And so, if sir has accepted to address the participants of this webinar, I am very sure personally also that it will be of great benefit to all of us. Law, as it keeps on evolving, and we need to keep track of law and its interpretation, because it makes a great deal of difference between whether we are interpreting the law correctly and using it in our orders or not. It makes a great deal of difference in terms of money also, the revenue, in terms of revenue also, and I don't know how much revenue we might have lost in wrongly interpreting various sections of our own laws. It must be a huge amount of money, and I wonder if there is a research paper quantifying that loss that we have incurred, merely due to the wrong interpretation that we have done from time to time in our orders. Sometimes we just note that if we had not written this line like that, we had written it in a different way, on the same facts and circumstances, on the same material, we could have got a successful order, but we could not get it in number of situations. The board also wants that there should be minimal litigation, but litigation of the successful type, I'm sure everybody would welcome. Any kind of litigation that leads to revenue for us, for the department, for the government, it would always be greatly welcomed by all the levels of the department. And so, in that light, such webinars find a lot of relevance. So having said that, and having welcomed SS Rana sir among us, I would also like to mention that Rana sir has sent us 4 to 5 files that we have emailed to all of you, and sir will be using a PowerPoint presentation, but those additional files that sir has sent, that is going to be of huge help to you all. Those files will be loaded on the Daksh portal also. And so you must go through those files, and in case somebody doesn't have those files, he must WhatsApp to me, and will be, or send me a mail or something on the official mail ID, and I will be a pleasure to help you out with those files. So, sir, I will be wishing you a very good morning and a big welcome. And sir, it's a bright sunny morning in Lucknow here today, and I'm sure that from the look of the smile on your face, it must be very nice in Delhi also right now, sir.
Pleasant in Delhi.
Sir, I request you to begin your lecture, sir.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank DTRTI for giving me this opportunity to address everyone, so many officers at a given point of time. I know the budget is being announced today, so some of us would be more excited in listening to the budget rather than in listening to me. But still, I would like to go ahead with my presentation, presuming that it will be very useful for you in the assignments that are provided to you in the course of your duties. Now, the first, I will be dealing with two topics today. The first topic is common mistakes in assessment, and the second topic will be case laws in favor of the department. Now, can you see my PowerPoint presentation? Hello?
Not yet, sir.
Not yet. Try to share it. Is it visible now?
Not yet, sir.
Chalo. Then I'll go ahead simply. Now, basically, there are two views in the income department. One is the view that the assessing officers need not rely upon the case laws. They have to simply focus on the facts, and the case laws are not important. Now, there is a second view, and the second view is the one to which I subscribe. The view is that the AO must know the case laws. The case laws are important, and whenever the assessee relies upon case laws, it is important that the assessing officers counters the case laws of the assessee with his own case laws. It is because of this second view of mine, I feel that the case laws are so important that I have been trying to prepare a compilation of judgments in favor of the department. I was posted in ITAT for last 3 years, and during this tenure, I have prepared an Excel sheet which contains 1150 judgments in favor of the department. I have already shared this Excel sheet with DTRTI, and I hope you get a copy of the same from DTRTI. Now, all these 1150 judgments are also available in PDF format in my office. So either the DTRTA can have it collected from me whenever somebody is coming to Delhi, because 1150 files cannot be sent by email or any other mode. So they can be collected from me. Apart from that, I have prepared a summary of 24 circulars which were issued by CBDT to minimize litigation. So the CBDT has issued 24 circulars that on these topics, on these issues, the department should not litigate further. So it's clear that the assessing officer is not required to make addition on those issues. On those issues, the department is not required to file further appeals. So a summary of those 24 circulars also I have forwarded. Of course, the 24 circulars are available with me. You can either download them from IRS Officer Online or from any other portal. Apart from that, I've also prepared a section-wise submission on 70 topics, which can be collected from my office. Now, I'm also the editor of Taxolog e-Journal. Now, as officers of the department, you should be aware that for the last 1 year, the department has been publishing quarterly e-journal by the name of Taxolog. All the editions are now available on IRS Officers Online. I would request all of you to go to IRS Officers Online, download all the Taxologs e-journals which have been published till now. The 6th one has recently come. Now, in this Taxolog e-journal, I have written four articles. All those 4 articles I have shared with DTRTI. The first article which I have written is on common mistakes in assessment. So I will be going through whatever I have written in that article also, basically apprising you about what are the common mistakes that the assessing officers are making, which they should not make so as to make meaningful, sustainable additions. The second article I had written was on assessment of OCM cases. So basically this was pertaining to assessment of demonetization cases since they were time barring last December. The third article that I've written is with regard to the new penalty provisions under section 270A of the Income Tax Act. And the fourth article which I have written is the validity of statement on oath. So you can get a copy of all these articles either from Taxolog or from DTRTI. I would request all of you to read these articles. And please don't consider my request as a way of publicizing my articles. They are really useful. They will all help you in your day-to-day work. Now, one of the most important things that I realized in during my tenure in ITAT is we were losing almost all 99% of the penalty appeals were being lost in ITAT for very small, stupid mistakes being made by the assessing officer. I will now. So the first common mistake in assessment, which I would say, and I would not term it as a mistake also, I call it as a blunder in assessment. For the last 50 years, the officers of the department, they have not learned how to initiate penalty proceedings. Now it's a very sorry state of affairs that officers in the department for 50 years do not know how to even initiate, forget about levying the penalty. Now, just going into the history of the case, when we were the assessing officers, at the end of the assessment order, we used to write one sentence, penalty proceedings under section 271(1)(c) initiated separately. And almost everybody was writing that identical sentence in every assessment order. Now, one fine day, there is a High Court judgment which says that it does not amount to recording of proper satisfaction. Satisfaction is required at the end of each and every addition that you are making, so that you cannot have a common satisfaction for all the additions being made in the assessment order. So what happened as a result of that High Court judgment was that in the last 10, 15, 20 years, whatever penalty proceedings had been initiated in the department, all of them were quashed because of that reason. Now we moved a step forward. We started recording the satisfaction at the end of every edition. So from thereafter, the assessing officers were apprised of this fact and they started recording their satisfaction at the end of every edition that they were making in the assessment order. Now, how was this penalty being initiated at the end of the assessment order? In the normal course, the assessing officers would write one sentence, penalty proceedings under 271(1)(c) initiated for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income and oblique or for concealment of income. So this was a standard sentence which was being used by almost every assessing officer for initiating the proceedings under section 271(1)(c) of the Income Tax Act. Now what happens? 10-15 years after the earlier judgment, again a High Court judgment says that it does not amount to recording of proper satisfaction. So one Karnataka High Court judgment, it clearly says that for any addition, the penalty can be initiated either for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income or concealment of income. If you write, they call it the two limbs. If we mention both the limbs, that then it does not amount to recording of proper satisfaction. Now let us go deeper and think what is the view of the court. Now basically the view of the court is that inaccurate particulars of income and concealment of income are two separate charges. If in layman terms I explain it to you, that furnishing inaccurate particulars of income is like attempt to murder and concealment of income is murder. So basically what the court is saying is that you have to apply one charge for one addition. So for one addition you cannot have both the charges. So you have to clearly specify in the assessment order whether the charge is for inaccurate particulars of income or concealment of income. Now this judgment came in around 2013 and 14. Fine, the Delhi High Court judgment gave, the Karnataka High Court gave the judgment and we are bound to follow it. But now the issue that arises is whether we have learned from that Karnataka High Court judgment. Later SLP was also dismissed. Now the question is whether we learned from that judgment. Now from 2014 to 2021 now, the assessing officers continue to make that mistake. They continue to initiate penalty for inaccurate particulars of income as well as concealment of income. I am aware that from assessment year 17-18, section 270A has been introduced. I will be coming to that also. So basically what happened was, the sad part of the story is that we did not learn from our mistakes. Once the High Court had pointed out that penalty has to be initiated for one of the two limbs, immediately we should have learned, and thereafter, at least from 2015 onwards, we should have initiated the penalty only for one of the limbs, that is for inaccurate particulars of income or concealment of income. So when we are initiating the penalty, we should not write both the limbs. For last 2-3 years, I have been trying to campaign, telling the officers to initiate the penalty proceedings correctly, but till date, I don't see any significant improvement in the field. Very casually, the satisfaction for initiation of penalty is recorded. So my purpose of taking this session is to understand the importance of that one sentence that you are writing in the assessment order. Now, when we are writing one sentence for initiation of penalty proceedings in the assessment order, that single sentence is the foundation stone of the penalty that is going to be subsequently levied in the penalty order. So what is important is that we understand the importance of that one sentence for initiation of penalty, which we are recording in the assessment order. It cannot, you just cannot write a cut paste sentence in any assessment order. What I want you to understand is importance of that sentence. So what do we do when we make an addition and when we write that one sentence for initiation of that penalty? We stop, we think for 5 minutes. You should not be in such a hurry that you can't even stop and think for 5 minutes. We stop for 2 minutes, we stop for 5 minutes. We understand, we apply our mind whether it is for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income or whether it is for concealment of income. And then we write the sentence that penalty proceedings are being initiated for concealment of income, or we write the sentence that penalty proceedings are being initiated for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. Let us not be in such a hurry that casually write that sentence irrespective of whatever happens later on. The problem with the department is that no assessing officer has ever been penalized for recording wrong satisfaction despite hundreds of crores of penalty being lost. And that is the particular reason why we never learn from our mistakes. So we have to understand the importance of that one section And today from my entire session, if you just learn this one point when you go back home, the importance of correctly recording satisfaction in the assessment order, then I think it was all the worth for me for taking this session with you. Now going a step forward, I will be coming to section 278 subsequently. I am first, whatever I'm saying is for 271(1)(c. Identically, it is applicable for penalty proceedings under section 270A also, which I will coming to subsequently. Now, please understand, initiation of penalty has got two parts. One is the recording of satisfaction in the assessment order, where normally we are writing one sentence for initiation of that penalty. Equally important, that is 50% of the initiation. The other 50% of your satisfaction is carried in the printed notice, which is sent along with the assessment order. Now, in the printed, when you are sending the assessment order, along with that, there is also a printed notice sent with regard to penalty proceedings under section 271(1)(c) or 270A of the Income Tax Act. Now, what the courts are saying is that in the printed notice of 271(1)(c) or 270A, you must tick the appropriate box and strike off whatever is not applicable. If in the assessment order you have initiated penalty proceedings for inaccurate particulars of income, then in the printed notice it is mandatory that only inaccurate particulars of income is there and concealment of income has been struck off. Similarly, if in the assessment order you have initiated penalty proceedings under section 270A of the Income Tax Act for misreporting of income, then only the printed notice must only contain misreporting of income and the rest of it must be struck off. So basically, when we acquire jurisdiction in penalty proceedings, it is based on two things. One is the proper recording of satisfaction, and then second is the proper language of the printed notice. Now we come to the third part. When we are levying penalty under section 271(1)(c) or 270A of the Income Tax Act, then it can be levied only on the limb on which it was initiated. For example, if the penalty was initiated for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income, then in the printed notice, only furnishing inaccurate particulars of income was written, the rest was struck off. And in the penalty order, we levy penalty only for furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. Only under those circumstances, your penalty order is going to stand the test of appeal in ITAT. Otherwise, your penalty order will be struck off, maybe even by CIT appeals now, considering the plethora of judgments. So what we do is we casually initiate the penalty proceedings. We casually send the notices, we casually levy the penalty. We are not bothered that if the penalty is deleted. So this is not the kind of attitude which we expect the officers to show the importance and correctly levying the penalty proceedings under section. Now, penalty under section 271(1)(c) is to be initiated up to assessment year 2016-17. So we should all be aware of this fact that up to assessment year 2016-17, we initiate penalty under and levy penalty under 271(1)(c), and from assessment year 2017-18 onwards, we levy and initiate penalty under section 2C. Now, if we how many of you have read section 270A of the Income Tax Act completely? Can you raise your hands? Word by word. Has anybody ever cared to read section 270A of the Income Tax Act? Word, I'm not saying casually. After that, there is one more section 270AA. have you read it word by word? As assessing officers, it is your prime duty and responsibility to read these and interpret them correctly. Now, if we read section 270A of the Income Tax Act, now if we see compare it with section 271, there is a huge lot of difference in section 270A of the Income Tax Act. Now 270A broadly, the penalties can be categorized into two parts. The first one is underreporting of income, and the second one, which normally in layman terms we say is misreporting of income, but as we call it, underreported income is in consequence of any misreporting thereof. So that is the second part defined in section 270A(9) of the Income Tax Act. So basically, we have to understand that in section 271(1)(c), the entire penalty was leviable from 100% to 300%, whether it is furnishing inaccurate particulars of income or whether it is concealment of income. Now, in section 270A of the Income Tax Act, there is a difference. The penalty for underreporting of income is 50%. The penalty for misreporting of income, that is 200%. So for each and every addition, it becomes all the more important to apply your mind, and after that addition, write whether it is for underreporting of income or misreporting of income. That also after noting the correct language. So if you are, all of you can read my article, new penalty provisions under section 270A of the Income Tax Act. I have written in the article what is the correct sentence to initiate penalty under section 270A. So when you are initiating penalty under section 270A for underreporting of income, you will write penalty proceedings under section 270A are hereby initiated since the assessee has underreported his income. Simple, just one sentence. For the other part, you will write penalty proceedings under section 270A are hereby initiated since the assessee has underreported his income, which is in consequence of misreporting thereof. So this is the correct terminology as per the Act, what we are supposed to write in the assessment order. The exact language you can read even from my article. You will be getting a copy of my article. Next is, once you initiate the penalty under section 270A of the Income Tax Act, you please strike off whatever is not applicable. If in the assessment order only underreporting of income is there, then you only leave that and strike off whatever is not applicable. Please understand the importance of striking off the irrelevant part in the printed penalty notice. The staff just puts it up, you just sign it. That is not the way to work in the income tax department from now onwards. Please be careful in this regard. Now, let us come to the second difference. The first difference between 271(1)(c) and 270A is that the tax rates are different. Here it is 50 and 200%. There is a second difference. If we read section 271(1)(c) of the Income Tax Act, under furnishing inaccurate particulars of income and concealment of income is not defined in the Income Tax Act. Here, if we read section 270A of the Income Tax Act, I'm again requesting all of you to go back and please read section 270A because it is a very important section. You are using this section almost in every assessment order that you are passing, but you have been careless enough not to read it word by word. So in section 270A, underreporting as well as misreporting has been clearly defined. So underreporting of income is defined in section 270A subsection 2, and misreporting of income is defined in section 270A subsection 9 of the Income Tax Act. Now we go a step further. When you are initiating penalty under section 270A of the Income Tax Act for underreporting of income, then you should go to the subclause of 270A2 under which it falls. If you can mention that in the satisfaction that you are recording in the assessment order, then that would be the appropriate correct way of levying penalty. You say it is for underreporting of income, mention only one limb, and also mention the 270A2 subsection under which it falls. Similarly, when you are initiating penalty for misreporting of income, you write only for one limb, that is you are initiating penalty for misreporting of income, and you also write the subsection of 270A9 under which it falls. So that, according to me, would be the true and correct way of initiating penalty proceedings under section 270A of the Income Tax Act. Of course, we don't put in so much of efforts. We don't apply our mind to that extent because we are always in a hurry. Why we are always in a hurry, I have not been able to understand till date. Now, I am not going into the details of what is written into section 270A2 as well as section 270A9 that you can all read from the Income Tax Act. Now, after section 270A of the Income Tax Act, there is one more section which is 270AA of the. Can you raise your hands? How many of you have read section 270AA of the Income Tax Act? Well, I think I'll just proceed. Now, the heading of this section is immunity from imposition of penalty. Now, what does this section say? Because this is a section which you have to apply every day, and you have not even read this section. Now, what does this section say? Basically, this section says that if penalty under 270A has been levied, the assessee pays all the taxes and gives in writing that he is not filing and pays the taxes within 30 days. And writes a letter to the assessing officer that he is not filing an appeal against the order. Under those circumstances, the assessee will get immunity from imposition of penalty. That penalty proceedings in the case of the assessee will be dropped. Now, what is the catch here? Because until we go and read the section or subsection completely, we do not know. Now, if we read this section properly, then we will realize that immunity from imposition of penalty under section 270A is only there with regard to underreporting of income. It is not applicable with regard to misreporting of income. So where penalty is leviable at the rate of 50%, if the assessee pays all the taxes within 30 days and gives in writing that the assessee is not filing appeal against the order, under those circumstances, it is mandatory for the assessing officer to drop those penalty proceedings. However, if the penalty has been initiated at the rate of 200% for misreporting of income, under those circumstances, the immunity is not applicable to the taxpayer. Now, this was the first common mistake in assessment which I refer to, because the subject today is common mistakes in assessment. That was the first mistake. Now coming to what is the second mistake that we are doing at the stage of assessment. Now, I call it the issue of specific questionnaire. What was happening all over the country? We prepare a 32-point questionnaire, and irrespective of what is written in the return of the assessee, we send that 32-point questionnaire to each and every case which has been selected from scrutiny. The moment you send that general questionnaire, from that very point of time, half the battle of the department has already been lost. Please understand. Of course, these facts will change now with the e-assessment coming in, but that was the sorry state of affairs. Now, when you send a 30-page questionnaire, please understand what happens. The moment you send a 32-point questionnaire, the assessee will come with 1 or 2 adjournments, and he will file reply for 10 or 15 each points. Rest he will seek adjournment. Again, he will come after a month. He will file reply of another 10 points. Ki, sir, we need some more time. What happens in the entire process is that the main issue which required investigation, which required application of mine, the assessee does not give the details till the very end. And we do not know what is important in that. Now imagine what is happening in CAS. CAS full form is Computer Assisted Scrutiny Selection. If we just have a look at the CAS, then in CAS, the issues are identified focus in the process. But once you issue a general questionnaire, all those issues, they get merged and they stop being highlighted. So what is the solution to this? The solution to this is if we study every return before we send a questionnaire, the first and in every questionnaire must be specific. We cannot issue a general questionnaire. That is to be principle. Issues have been highlighted by in the case. Whatever the issues on which the case has been selected for scrutiny, even in full scrutiny cases, the issues 4, 5 issues are always identified. Those 4, 5, 6 issues should be at the top of your questionnaire. Your questionnaire should start from those 4, 5 issues, which no irrelevant question should be sent in the questionnaire because it diverts your attention from the main issues. So I will suggest all of you to please understand the importance of sending a correct specific questionnaire. If we restrict ourselves to the limited issues where the assessee is likely to have done concealment of income, then our efforts will be much more productive. The second way is you send a specific questionnaire, you file whatever replies and you pass an order of return income, which is not really the correct way of doing things. Now we come into the next mistake in assessment. Now, please, penalty process, you acquire jurisdiction by recording of satisfaction in the assessment order. And service of notice under section 143(2). So importance of this issue and proper service of notice under section 143(2) has to be understood by the assessing officers. Because if the notice under section 143(2) is not issued properly, is not served properly, then the entire proceedings, scrutiny proceedings are invalid. Now, under the new scheme of things, we will look at what is possibly the problems can arise. So what we should do is, what we are presently doing is that once we receive a case list of cases selected for scrutiny under case, we send the notice by email and forget. That is the mistake we are making. Is it not the duty of the assessing officer to ensure that the email, at least the email, has been properly served? What invariably happens is that when we send the notice under section 143(2) by email, out of 100 cases, in 3, 4 or 5 cases, the email is not delivered. But we do not care to see whether the email has been delivered or not. So even earlier, it was important for assessing officers when notices were being sent by speed post to ensure that 143(2) by. It is very important for the assessing officer. It's not the duty of the staff. It's the duty of the assessing officer to ensure that the notice through email has been delivered. On ITBA, it has been properly delivered and served upon the assessee. Now, all of you must read Rule 127 of the income tax rules. Now, what does this Rule 127 of IT rule says? It says that the service of notice, summons, requisition, order, and other communication, all these notices can be sent to 4 addresses of the assessee. Please note down Rule 127 of the IT rules. Now, the first address is the address available in the PAN database of the assessee. The second is the address which the assessee has disclosed in the income tax return. Third is the address available in the last income tax return furnished by the assessee. And fourth is the registered office of the company where the assessee happens to be a company. So please understand any notice, whether it is 143.2 or 142.1 or summons, especially when you're issuing 133.6 or summons, under those circumstances, the notices are required to be sent only at these 4 addresses. So in this regard, I would request all of you to read Rule 127 of the income tax rules. Just as in penalty proceedings, as in scrutiny proceedings, it is important for you to understand the importance of acquiring jurisdiction. Similarly, in reassessment proceedings, it is very important for us to understand that we are able to correctly acquire jurisdiction. So for reassessment proceedings under section 147, how do we acquire proper jurisdiction? The first part of it is a recording of proper satisfaction. The second part is proper approval by appropriate authority. The third part is issue and proper service of notice under section 147. And the fourth part is issue and proper service of notice under section 143(2). Unless all these 4 conditions are cumulatively satisfied, then the reassessment proceedings, you have not acquired jurisdiction under section 47 of the Income Tax Act for the reassessment proceedings. So we will go one by one with all these 4 conditions and what are the mistakes which we are commonly making. Now, please understand whether it is written in the Income Tax Act or not. As per various High Court and Supreme Court judgment, it is mandatory for you to issue notice under section 143(2) of the Income Tax Act in cases it is mandatory for you to issue notice under section 143(2) in reassessment proceedings. अरे शोर बंद करो ना बाहर. Now what happens is the assessee files return of income in response to notice under section 147. What was earlier happening was that in most cases notices under section 143(2) were not being issued. That is not the only one problem. The other problem is that if the assessee files a letter stating that my earlier return of income may be treated as a return in response to notice under section 147 of the Income Tax Act. Now, under those circumstances, we did not issue notice under section 143(2) of the Income Tax Act. Now, from the judicial rulings, it is very clear that even where the assessee files a letter that my earlier return may be treated as return in response to notice under section 147, in those circumstances, it is mandatory for us to issue notice under section 143(2) of the Income Tax Act. Similarly, what happens is when we assessments under section 150 circumstances, it is mandatory for us to issue notice under section 143(2). If we have not issued 143(2) of the income tax in reassessment proceedings, 153A or 153C proceedings, then the proceedings are absent. Now we have to understand the difference between notices under section 143(2) and 142(1). There is a difference between the two notices. The notice under section 143(2), if you read the language, it gives an opportunity to the assessee to furnish whatever documents it want to submit in support of the return of income that the assessee has filed. In 142(1), we give specific directions to the assessee that you are required to furnish so and so documents. Please read the language of both the notices and understand the importance of the difference between the two notices. I think most of you are aware that in the reassessment proceedings, the assessee files objections to the initiation of proceedings under section 147 of the Income Tax Act. As per Supreme Court ruling, in case of GK and drive shaft, it is mandatory for everyone. It is mandatory for pass a written speaking order with regard to considering these objections before passing the final assessment order under section 147 of the Income Tax Act. This is one issue which I feel most of the assessing officers are aware, but if you are not aware, take note of this Supreme Court judgment in the case of GK and drive shaft. In fact, I would request all of you to read the Supreme Court judgment wherever it is applicable. Now, if we read the Income Tax Act, especially section 147 of the Income Tax Act, there are hardly 8 or 10 sections we are dealing with in our day-to-day, whether it is 142(1), 147, very few sections, 271, 1C, very few sections, 68, 69. These are the main sections that we are dealing with in our day-to-day assessment proceedings as an assessing officer. I request all of you to go back and read these sections again. Maybe there are so many things which have gone unnoticed, which you are. Similarly is the situation with regard to 147 of the Income Tax Act. We open whenever required, but on one fine day, you should read word by word this entire section because it is very important part. Presently, I think if 70% of the cases we are doing in scrutiny, then at least 30% of the cases are those which we are reopening under section 147 of the Income Tax Act. So we are supposed to read this section and ensure that wherever we are reopening the cases, they are properly reopened. Now, if we read 147 of the Income Tax Act, broadly it divides reopening of any assessment into two parts. One is within 4 years and one is beyond 4 years, that is in the 5th and 6th years. Reopening is allowed for 6 years. So the Act clearly differentiates between the cases where less than 4 years have passed and those cases where more than 4 years, 4 to 6 years have passed. Where less than 4 years have passed, it is relatively easy. But when more than 4 years, no reopening should be done unless there is failure on the part of the assessee to disclose fully and truly all material facts. Now, please understand this section itself is saying that beyond 4 years, there must be reason of failure on the part of the assessee to disclose fully and truly all material facts. Now, what the high courts are saying now, that when you are recording when you're recording satisfaction for initiation of proceedings under section 148(7) of the Income Tax Act, beyond 4 years, in that recording of satisfaction, in the end, it is mandatory for the assessing officer to write that there is reason on the failure on the part of the assessee to disclose fully and truly all material facts. Now, if you don't write this sentence at the end of initiation of proceedings, then those reopening is bad in the eyes of law. Please understand, beyond 4 years, don't forget to write this one sentence which is written in the Act. You can copy it from the Act or you can take it from my PowerPoint presentation, which I'll be giving you. It may be there in my articles also, common mistake in assessment. So these are small mistakes because of which we are losing huge amount of revenue. but everybody is escaping. Now what happens is that in a large number of cases, information is received from the officer to reopen the cases based on the information which have been received from the investigation wing. In those circumstances, two things are important. First of all, while recording the satisfaction, don't take it casually. Important sensitive recording of satisfaction for initiation of proceedings under section 147. It is a very important part, as important as the recording of satisfaction for initiation of penalty proceedings. It is mandatory for you to apply your mind, because in so many cases the courts have held that there was non-application of mind, and we also feel that the assessing officers are not duly applying their mind while they are recording this satisfaction. So what you are supposed to do, first you are required to write in detail the information which has been received from the investigation wing. 1 page, 2 page, 3 page. There's no harm if you write a detailed information which has been received from the investigation wing. The second part, the information that you have received, you must compare it with the return of income that the assessee has filed. And finally reach at a conclusion that the information which has been received from the investigation wing or from any other third party based information with the return of income, it is clear that there is some undisclosed. Then the question comes in the end that when we compare the information with the return of income filed by the assessee, then we reach at a conclusion that there is this amount of undisclosed income. Where the assessee has not filed return of income, in that case also it's mandatory to first write about the information, then you write the assessee has not filed return of income, then you say record your satisfaction that you have reason to believe that income of the assessee has escaped assessment. So this comparing with the return of income and writing your conclusion, that is very important. We have to understand the importance of this. Write information received from the investigation wing and case reopened, that is not what law requires us to do. Please, we have to understand to take our work a little more seriously. Now, what the courts are saying is that when we are reopening the 147 proceedings, when it goes for approval to the additional CIT or to the CIT, only approved or I am satisfied, only those words are not enough for recording of satisfaction. So basically, of late, we have been apprising the senior officers that when they are recording their approval, it should be at least in 2 or 3 sentences. Only approved or I am satisfied does not presently satisfy the rules of law. So that approval also has to be a little more detailed. The assessing officers must read section 147 of the Income Tax Act and be very clear whether approval is required to be taken from the PCIT or range head. If approval is required to be taken from the range head, you take it from PCIT, or if it is required to be taken from PCIT, you take the approval from range head. Initiation of proceedings under section 147 of the Income Tax Act is absolutely invalid. Again, your reopening will not stand the test of law. In a large number of cases that we are reopening every day are on the basis of cash deposit made by the assessee. Now we have to understand what the courts are saying. The courts are saying that simply presence of cash deposits in a bank account does not amount to escapement of income. I'll repeat the sentence. Simply presence of cash deposits in a bank account does not amount to escapement of income. What does it mean? If while reopening the case under 147, you simply write that information was received that cash of 15 lakhs is found deposited in the bank account of the assessee. Hence, I have reason to believe that income has escaped assessment. This is invalid reopening in the eyes of law. Why? Because from that cash deposit, you have to compare it with the return of income filed by the assessee. If the assessee is not filed return of income, you write that. If return of income has been filed, then you say how those cash deposits are not falling in the return of income which the assessee has filed, and then draw your satisfaction. So even in cash deposit cases, please be a little more careful. Please be little more sensitive in recording your satisfaction for reopening of these cases. Now, if any one of you is doing search assessments or assessment under Section 153C of the Income Tax Act, now in a search case, there are two persons. One is the person in whose case the search was conducted. So we say the assessing officer of the searched person. And if there is any seized material which is found which relates to some other person, then we say the assessing officer, the person who having jurisdiction over the other person. So when we are initiating proceedings under Section 153C of the Income Tax Act, both the officers are required to record their satisfaction. Now there is a CBDT circular that 2 satisfactions have to be recorded for initiating proceedings under Section 153C of the Income Tax Act. So I have noticed in cases where both the satisfactions are not recorded. So please be careful in recording satisfaction under Section 153C of the Income Tax Act. Now, another major mistake that we are making . Another major mistake that we are making is whether a particular addition is required to be made under Section 68 or 69 of the Income Tax Act. Now, as I said, we are dealing with very few sections in our day-to-day assessment proceedings. Some of those sections are Section 68, 69, A, B, and C of the Income Tax Act. Please go back and read these sections word to word. Each and every word in these sections matters for your day-to-day assessment proceedings. Now remember what is the opening sentence of Section 68 of the Income Tax Act. Section 68, the opening words are where any sum is found recorded in books of account of the assessee. So you can make the addition under Section 68 only if the amount is recorded in the books of account of the assessee. Now take the case of a cash deposit where the assessee is not maintaining books of account or where this does not form part of his books of account. In those cases, the addition cannot be made under Section 68 of the Income Tax Act. If the assessee is not having business income, the bank account does not constitute his books of account, then the addition should not be made under Section 68. In those circumstances, it has to be made under Section 69A of the Income Tax Act. Where there is unexplained expenditure outside books of account, that has to be made under Section 69C of the Income Tax Act. So as assessing officers, it is important for you to apply your mind under which section you are making the addition. And invariably, every addition you are making, you should write the section. I have seen assessing officer not even writing the section. So please write whether it is 68, 69A, 69B, 69C. And after due application of your mind. Now there have been cases where there is amalgamation of a company where a company has gone in NCLT or a company has been suspended by ROC. They are sensitive cases. In such cases, my advice is please discuss the matter with your seniors and only then decide what is required to be done in those cases. Now, in a large number of assessments, what we do is we are not satisfied with the details which have been furnished by the assessee, and we apply GP rate. Now, please understand, wherever you are applying estimating income of the assessee at GP rate, in those cases, it is mandatory for you to reject the books of account after giving detailed reasons. If you do not reject the books of account of the assessee under Section 145, You cannot estimate the income of the assessee by applying GP rate. So please give detailed reasons for rejection of books of account, reject the books of account, and only in those cases you are eligible to apply GP rate, not otherwise. Now, when we are making disallowance under section 14A of the Income Tax Act, recording of satisfaction of the assessing officer is very important. Now, all the courts have held that the recording of the satisfaction. So you have to, the assessing officer has to write a sentence. Yes, I am satisfied that disallowance is required to be made under 14A. So satisfaction means yes, I am satisfied. Whether it is the penalty proceedings, whether it is 14A satisfaction, wherever it said the word satisfaction come, the assessing officer has to write yes, I am satisfied. So even initiation of penalty, levy of penalty, 14A, 147, everywhere those words have to be used. I am satisfied, giving detailed reasons. So recording of satisfaction is very important while making disallowance under 14A, which most of the cases, the satisfaction is not being properly recorded. Now, another common mistake in assessment is that when you are making an addition under section 50C of the Income Tax Act, the assessee has sold a property below the circle rate. You want to make an addition under section 50C. The assessee files an objection. Now, wherever the assessee files an objection, it's mandatory for the assessing officer to refer the property for valuation. You simply cannot proceed with the 50C addition without referring the case for valuation to the valuation officer. So please understand, it is mandatory for you to refer a case for valuation in 50C cases wherever the assessee files objection. Similarly, with regard to section 56(2)(7)(a) and B, there is rule 11(UAA). In those cases, the valuation, there are two methods prescribed. One is the fair market. Now let's come to the background of this 56(2)(7)(a) section. Basically, when shares of an unlisted company are transferred from X to Y, then it is required, those shares are required to be got valued through a valuer. There are two methods prescribed under Rule 11(UAA). One is the fair market value of unquoted equity shares. The second method is determined by a merchant banker as per discounted cash free flow method. What mistake we are making is that Rule 11(UA) clearly specifies that he can get the valuation done either under clause A or clause B. It is the option of the assessee. So if the assessee gets it done at fair market value, you can find fault with that and make addition by substituting your fair market value. But you cannot use another method to find fault with the calculation of the assessee. We have to understand the importance. It is the option of the assessee to which rule he is required to use. Another important mistake that we are making is that we don't confront the evidence to the assessee. We send notices under section 133(6). We find that some of those notices have come back unserved. If they have not come back unserved, then it is our responsibility to confront that evidence to the assessee. Or we have received third-party information. It is mandatory for us to confront that evidence to assessee. Please understand, confronting evidence to the assessee and allowing cross-examination wherever statements have been recorded, it is the right of the assessee. So he should be allowed these rights. So always confront evidence and allow cross-examination wherever statements against the assessee have been recorded. Now, as you are aware, when we are making an addition under section 68, 69, A, B, C, D, in those cases, presently tax is required to be levied at the rate of 60%. So in those cases, in the assessment order, it is mandatory for you to write that tax is being levied at the rate of 60% in view of provisions of section 115 BBE of the Income Tax Act. Please go back and read section 115 BBE of the Income Tax Act. And whenever you are making addition under section 68 or 69, write that one sentence. 115B. Also note that wherever an addition is made under section 68 or 69, penalty cannot be initiated under section 270A. It can be initiated only under section 271A because at the rate of 60%, penalty is leviable only at the rate of 10%, and that is in section 2. Any penalty under wrong provisions, then the penalty proceedings will be vitiated. Now, so I will, with that, I will like to conclude my session so far as common mistakes in assessment. I would like to take some sessions, some questions if there are any. Any questions before I take a 10-15 minute session on that case laws in favor of department?
Well, participants can unmute themselves and put your questions or discussion, whatever you like.
Sir, good afternoon. Sir, good afternoon. Sir, this is Vinay, Income Tax Inspector from Meerut. Sir, throughout all the discussion, I found that all the courts have taken into consideration only the literal part of the act. None of the courts have taken the intention of the legislator. Why the intention of legislator is such has not been considered it?
See, we are the executive. The income tax department constitutes the executive of Government of India. Our task is to implement the laws of the land. The land are what is written in the Income Tax Act plus what is said by the High Court plus what is said by the Supreme Court. We are, whatever the High Court is saying, we are not supposed to question that. That is the rule of the law as on date, and you are supposed to implement that. What you interpret, because every officer will interpret it differently. What the court has said, that is the correct interpretation, and you should learn to accept the decisions of the high courts in the correct spirit and apply it accordingly.
Sir, I am also asking about the interpretation before the court. I am not telling about the interpretation before the ITOs or.
If you read any high court judgment, they have given detailed reasons why they are following a particular interpretation. We should respect that interpretation and that judgment of the High Court and not say that we are right and High Court is wrong. What High Court is a senior authority, we are bound to follow and respect what they are saying in the true spirit.
Sir,
what I am saying is the interpretation of the courts, whatever they are saying is correct. At least we learn from our mistakes and follow it subsequently. Even if till then we were thinking that the interpretation was different.
Exactly, sir. But my submission is that perhaps our representative or our standing counsel could not convince the court that there are some intention of the legislature which also to be considered.
That is our failure for which we cannot blame the courts.
Yes,
if our representation is weak, we are supposed to improve our representation. We cannot blame the courts for that.
Exactly, sir. And my second question.
What I am saying is the department is failing at every step. We are making wrong additions, incorrect additions. We are not writing the sections properly. We are not serving the notices properly. We are not making proper representation in ITAT and High Court. As a result of that, the revenue gain from scrutiny is very negligible. And we are all to blame for that. We cannot blame anybody else for that. Yes, exactly. Next question.
Sir, my second question is, after recording the statement, I never seen that officers providing the copy of the same to the SSE. This is a very much, I think, this is not fair for them. So this should also be made mandatory that every statement is to be provided to the SSEs also.
As I said in my presentation, it is the right of the assessee. It is the duty of every assessing officer to provide that statement, to allow cross-examination. This is what we are supposed to do, what we don't do. So
exactly,
you see, we should respect the rights of the taxpayer. Addition hota hai nahi hota hai, that is not your primary. You are not getting salary to make additions. You are getting salary to make justice, to give justice to the taxpayer. Addition banta hai aap kijiye, nahi banta hai nahi kijiye. That has to be the spirit. Unless you follow that spirit, unless you give all the duties to the taxpayer, we will not be able to do fair assessments. Please go back with that spirit of doing justice to the taxpayer in your entire life, in your entire career.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Well,
ज्ञान को करिए कि सर का वो चेक करिए कि सर का ऑडियो वगैरह सही है.
So since there are no more questions, I think I'll start with my second presentation, just 10-15 minutes with regard to case laws in favor of the department.
Yes, sir, we can take more questions after your next presentation at the end.
Okay, fine. So coming to my second topic, the case laws in favor of the department. As I said, there are two views. One view is that the assessing officer need not know the case laws. He has to simply make detailed investigations with regard to facts and only present the facts in the assessment order. I do not subscribe to that view. I am of the view that every assessing officer is supposed to know the case laws. If you do not know the case laws, as I said, our job is to implement the laws of the land. The laws of the land is what is written in the Income Tax Act, plus what is said by the High Courts, plus what is said by the Supreme Court. If we don't know the law, how can we implement it? Now the assessee writes 4 or 5 judgments in support of an argument which he is taking. We just write one sentence, these case laws are not applicable to the facts of the case, without even reading the judgments. Is that correct? Is that imparting of justice to the taxpayer? According to me, no. That is the reason we are not able to do justice. That's the reason why our additions get deleted in appeals. What is the correct method? And he gives the facts. Along with the facts, he gives 5 judgments in favor of why that addition should not be made. What the assessing officer is supposed to do, he's supposed to read all those 5 judgments and counter. If he's satisfied, he is not supposed to make the addition. If he is not satisfied with regard to those judgments, he is supposed to give judgments in favor of the department to counter those judgments. That is the correct procedure of delivering justice to the taxpayer. What we have not been doing. We just ignore whatever judgments he's mentioning. That they will see in the CIT appeal or ITT will see that correct way of doing the assessment. And that is where I am highlighting the importance of case laws in the department. The case laws in favor, even if you are not aware, it really doesn't make a difference. But question is, who will quote the case laws in favor of the department? As an assessing officer, it is your responsibility to know the judgments in favor of the department. If you are not aware of judgments in favor of the department, if you have not
Well, Rana sir is going to be back very soon. Hold on, please. There was a little net issue in Delhi.
Can you hear me now? Am I
Yes, sir.
audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh. So friends, what I was highlighting was the importance of case laws in the income tax department. I have noticed that we have very intelligent IRS officers, income tax officers, staff members in the department. They will read the newspapers, magazines, books, everything on this earth, but they will not read the case laws. In my entire career, I am able to understand as to what is the aversion to reading these. Now, once you start reading the case laws, you will understand that each and every case law is just like a story. You should develop interest in reading the case laws. I have given you 1150 cases in favor of the department. Even if you read 20, 30 or 50 judgments in favor of the department, you will be able to appreciate what the courts are saying about a particular statute. The problem is that we don't read the complete judgment word to word and we draw our conclusion. No, the High Court was wrong. So my entire purpose of taking this section is to make you aware of the importance of case laws. The facts are as important as the case laws. If you want to be a good assessing officer, whether you want to make an addition, whether you want to leave an addition, it is very important that you know all the case laws of the income tax. It has been my experience that somehow there is a reluctance on the part of the officers to read these case laws. I don't understand. Today, all the case laws are available online. They are available on NGRS. They are easily available, easily accessible. Still, why we don't read? I am simply not able to understand. So I once again, before I proceed with my presentation, I once again request all of you to please read as many judgments in favor of the department, against the department, whenever you get free time. It will widen your horizon of thinking so far as the income tax is concerned. You will be able to take correct decisions. You will be able to impart justice to the taxpayer. Now, I have already sent you an Excel sheet containing 1150 judgments in favor of the department. Broadly, some of the most important judgments are with regard to Section 68 of the Income Tax Act. There is a Supreme Court judgment in the case of NRA Iron. Then you have NDR Promoters, Prem Castings, MAF Academy. Then similarly, 68 I have categorized into different parts. My Excel sheet is arranged section wise. So if you see section 68, you will find that arranged into 68 loans, 68 cash deposit, 68. So you can simply go through all those judgments. I would not like to spend too much of time on going through each of these judgments. There are judgments with regard to bogus purchase. Now, what was happening with regard to bogus purchase was that earlier most of the courts held that simply GP rate is required to be applied for bogus purchases. Subsequently, there was a decision of Gujarat High Court in the case of Vijay Proteins, where they applied 25% GP rate for bogus purchases. Then there was another Gujarat High Court judgment in the case of NK Proteins. That was name of the company at that point was NK Industries. When it went to Supreme Court, it is the judgment is by the name of NK Proteins. What has happened in that case is that the Supreme Court has upheld 100% disallowance of bogus purchases. So I've seen in the field also that where assessing officers are applying GP rate to bogus purchases, the audit party is pointing out objections in view of NK Proteins why 100% disallowance was not made. So I would request all of you to go back and read this judgment of Supreme Court so far in NK Proteins with regard to bogus purchases. Similarly, penny stock, some judgments have came in favor of the department, particularly Delhi High Court in the case of Udit Kalra. Because of that, most of the penny stock cases, they have availed of the Vivad Se Vishwas scheme. There are 10 or 15 judgments which are there in my Excel sheet with regard to penny stock whenever you want to make an addition. Section 69 says with regard to unexplained expenditure, there is a proviso. I want all of you to read that proviso. Basically, what that proviso says is whenever you are making an addition on account of unexplained expenditure, it will be deemed to be income of the assessee and no benefit with regard to under any other head will be allowed when you are making a disallowance under Section 69C of the Income Tax Act is concerned. Then I've got a separate judgments so far as addition on account of gift is concerned. About 10 or 15 judgments are there. Now, a large number of judgments are there with regard to Section 271(1)(c). So this is particularly useful when the assessee files objections. No, that's with regard to 147. A large number of judgments are there with regard to Section 147 of the Income Tax Act. You can rely upon those judgments whenever the assessee files objections to the reopening of assessment proceedings under Section 147. Similarly, large number of judgments are there with regard to levy of penalty under Section 271(1)(c), 271(a)(b), (a)(c). All those penalties, whenever we are levying the penalties, you can rely upon the judgments which I have given. Then there is judgments with regard to allowability of deduction under Section 54, which says that if you purchase property in the name of wife or some other person, the deduction is not allowable. Then there are large number of judgments, particularly with regard to search assessments. A large number of 153A, 153C, 158BC judgments are there. I would simply request all of you to go through all these judgments, and I think now all of you must be interested in listening to the budget also. So with that, I would like to conclude my session and take up the questions. Any questions? My summary of case laws in Yes.
Okay. The participants are requested to unmute themselves. Those who want to ask a question, kindly unmute yourself.
Hello.
Mr.
Yes.
Banerjee.
Sir, I am Mr. Biswanath Banerjee, ITO, DG Investigation Circle, Lucknow. Just 2 or 3 questions. I just found it that sometimes it has happened that in a particular case, some high courts have given their separate decisions. Another high court is giving in favor of the assessee, and another high court is giving the decision in favor of the department. So what will be the consequences of these decisions? Whether the department decision will take into consideration, or whether in somehow the decision is some high courts is now considering for another decision. So what is the principal direction on this matter? Please explain, sir.
See, so far, if there are various high court decisions, firstly, if there is a jurisdictional high court decision that is binding upon you, irrespective of what any other high court is saying, it doesn't matter if you have got a jurisdictional high court decision on that issue. So that is supreme so far as various high courts are concerned. Now the question is, if there is no jurisdictional high court judgments and there are conflicting judgments of various other high courts, then it depends on the person who is applying the law. Because what happens is tribunal by and large takes the decision which is favorable to the taxpayer. CIT appeal may take some decision which is favorable to the department. So it depends upon the authority who is exercising the jurisdiction upon which case law to rely upon. But primarily it is then benefit of doubt. The ITAT is giving benefit of doubt to the assessee, so they are applying the decisions which are in favor of the assessee, any high court.
Thank you, sir. Second question is that that somebody suppose one ITO is transferred from their present place to another place, and he has completed the assessment. In some part of the assessment he has completed, and after that, in the meantime, the another ITO posted there, and he has not get enough time to examine the cases in full and details. However, he has accepted his predecessor decisions, predecessor's investigations, and he has given his judgment on that behalf. Is it and CIT appeal in one line dismiss the appeal, dismiss the case that assessing officer has not applied his mind in his own? Is it correct?
No, the assessing, the CIT is a judicial authority. He has to give a detailed reason for deleting a particular addition.
No. CIT appeal has not given the decision. He has to simply reject the issue that the present assessing officer has not applied his mind, and he has only given the decision on behalf of his predecessor.
So this is a fault with our functioning. Where the assessing officer is required to apply mind, he doesn't apply. Where CIT appeal is supposed to apply his mind, he doesn't apply. And then we blame others for the state of affairs. We are in a very sorry state of affairs today. All our additions are getting deleted because of this reason only. I am not, CIT appeal has got full right to delete any addition, but then it should be a speaking appeal order. That is important. If the CIT appeal doesn't pass a speaking order, that is the mistake of the CIT appeal.
Okay, sir. Normally, this type of mistakes are being occurred by the honorable CIT appeals in normal cases also, as I find.
No, let us not highlight the post of CIT appeals. Everybody is making the mistakes.
Okay, sir.
And we are jointly responsible for that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, the participants are requested to kindly unmute yourself and speak up. I can see Mr. G. Sivaya is also there. You are quite active as far as discussions are concerned. So do come up with something if you are there. Mr. Sivaya. Any other participant who would like to say something or ask something?
So one person has raised his hand. Just see who it is.
Okay, that is Mr. Banerjee has already asked the question, sir. Anybody else who would like to say something? You have to just unmute yourself and speak up.
It's fine. I think everybody is waiting for the budget.
हेलो
Yes.
मैं अभी आपको कर रहा हूँ, मैं अभी एक लेक्चर ले रहा हूँ, अभी आपको कर रहा हूँ रिंग बैक. ओके.
We have already emailed all the documents of sir to all the participants, and I'm sure they must have received them in their email IDs. So
I'm sending PowerPoint presentations also. Both my presentations I'm just sending.
Okay, so we'll be emailing them also, as well as we'll be adding them to Daksh portal, so that whenever you will log in into Daksh portal, you can find those documents in future also, whenever you would like to find, whenever you would like to access them from there. So that is a one-stop point where all our documents are being uploaded in Daksh portal. So with that, now I request Mr. Nagendra Dikshitji, who is of course, I can see one hand raised before that, so I would like to ask Mr. Ratandeep Singh, please speak up.
Sir, namaskar, sir.
Ji, namaskar.
सर मैं रतन दीप हूँ, TRO सेंट्रल लखनऊ। मैं सर एक केस लॉ के रिगार्डिंग आपसे ये सर पूछना चाह रहा था कि जैसे कई बार असेसमेंट प्रोसीडिंग्स के दौरान एसएससी एक लिस्ट ऑफ केस लॉज देता है एओस को कि आप मतलब हम इसका सपोर्ट से अपना केस प्रेजेंट करना चाह रहे हैं। तो एओ के पार्ट पे सर क्या ये एक बेहतर चीज है कि हम उससे ये पूछे कि आप हमें केस लॉ वाइज ये भी बताइए कि आपके जो केस है उसके जो फैक्ट्स हैं और जो सर्कमस्टेंसेस जो किस तरह से इससे मतलब जस्टिफाई हो रहे हैं, ये केस लॉ कैसे इन पे एप्लीकेबल होता है?
नहीं देखिए, यू आर क्या है ना, यू आर सपोज टू नो दोज केस लॉज। इज प्रिज्यूम्ड, द असेसिंग ऑफिसर इज प्रिज्यूम्ड टू बी अ लर्नेड पर्सन who knows the case laws in favor of the department and against the department. You are supposed to know those case laws which is writing. If you don't know the case laws, you open them, read them, and then take a decision.
Sir.
उसने जो लिख के देना था उसने लिख के दे दिया। अब आपको देखना है कि जो उसने लिखा हुआ है वो उन फैक्ट्स पे लागू होता है कि नहीं होता है। It is your finding, your decision ultimately.
Sir, thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Please rest assured that we will get all the case laws from Sir's office, and I think we have many of them already with us. So we are uploading them all into the NADT, into our DTRTI Lucknow library, and we'll put them all in one folder so that you can access all the case laws from one particular place itself. So we'll ensure that is done in the next 1 week's time. Yeah, anybody else? Okay, Sunita Kishore, you want to say something?
Sir, can sir kindly highlight about the bogus purchases, how to go about bogus purchases?
No, what has happened is that earlier gross profit was being added. Then
sir, regarding that.
Gujarat High Court gave the decision in the case of Vijay Proteins. Then Supreme Court in the case of NK Proteins said that since Section 69 is a deeming provision, entire 100% is required to be disallowed. So please read all the judgments. If you feel that your facts are similar to NK Proteins, then you are required to disallow 100% of the purchases. If your facts are different, then even subsequent to NK Proteins, some more decisions have come against the department, which say only the GP is required to be allowed. So you can reach at a conclusive decision only once you read these case laws. Okay, otherwise, sir, the safest way is to allow and to disallow 100% bogus purchases following NK Proteins.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else would like to say something? Okay, in case there are any more questions, you can leave those questions in our WhatsApp or on the Daksh feedback also. Please give your feedback on every lecture that is being beamed to you from time to time. Please do not forget that. And now I invite Shri Nagin Dikshit ji, who is the Joint Director at the DTRTI, to present the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Mishra ji. I thank you, Sri S.S. Rana sir, for delivering very valuable information while we are making our assessment order. Sir has apprised us about penalty orders, how we mention the imposing of penalty in our assessment order, and how we made service of notice 143.2. There are various methods how we exercise those methods, and rule 27 of IT rules regarding 4 methods of service of 127 notice. And sir has also apprised us about reassessment proceedings, particularly 147 cases, and the mention of SC order, so Supreme Court order in GK and Shaft case. It is particularly about cases which are beyond 4 years. The assessing officer just elaborate the failure on part of SSC in his reasons. It is very important. So the judicial, as an assessing officer, we have a judicial sense, and sir has insisted upon that the assessing officer must have a judicial sense, and he elaborates the facts and basic essence in that section in which he is making addition, particularly cash deposits, 153C, both satisfaction recording इसमें जो होता है 68, 69 additions, GP rate additions में how we rejection of books of account is mandatory. Similarly, section 14A, satisfaction of AO is important. 50C cases, reference to valuation officer if objected by SSC, then it is mandatory. The fair market value in section 56(2), 7B, 7A, and we have also to confront evidence to the SSC while framing assessment. It is also a very important aspect. Sir has also elaborated that if we are making addition on account of 68 and 69, and rate of tax we are imposing 60% under 115 BBE, then we have to mention in assessment order. Similarly, in the case laws, sir has emphatically insisted that every assessing officer is supposed to know the case laws. Friends, we are really lacking on part of our reluctance to case laws, and it is equally important in the present scenario. So we really your session is, sir, is very important so far as an assessing officer's perspective is concerned. And sir, we are very thankful to you, and we thank on behalf of DTRTI Lucknow. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for having joined us, and we are very grateful for you to have taken out your extremely valuable time for us, sir. And just assured, sir, we'll send you the feedback after sending all the documents to the participants, and we'll try to get the remaining material also, whichever we haven't been able to get from you, and send it across to all our participants, sir. So with that, once again, a great big thank you to you, sir, for having joined us today and enlightened our participants.
Thank you, sir.
So friends, please join back at 3 p.m. for the next session. That will be from 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. or maybe 4:45 p.m. In between, you can analyze the budget because it is already delivered. The finance bill is in your hands or in your lap, whatever you may like to call it. Please start analyzing it and see those changes that have taken place and the direction in which the government wants the department to go. And so I hope you really like the session, and come back to us once again at 3 o'clock, and we'll be discussing with you a number of recent case laws that have come out of the courts, mainly from the Supreme Court and the High Courts, and which have given us light on how we need to understand our sections, particularly some of them which are more contentious in nature. So have a good lunch, and we could not give you a physical lunch, but the schools have opened from February 1, and hopefully this bigger school of you may also open up its doors and rather its canteen for your benefit. Meanwhile, enjoy yourself on our behalf over there and have a good time, and come back at 3 p.m. So thank you so much for being with us. In fact, I can also suggest to you that you need not log out from here. In case you log out, you can log in again with the same link. So a good lunch and see you again at 3 p.m.